My in-laws always laugh when I say I work from home, claiming it's not a real job. So I brought them to a business gala, then took the stage to accept the Top Entrepreneur Award. Wait, she's the keynote speaker, one whispered in disbelief. So, what exactly do you do again? Audrey asked, spearing a cherry tomato on her fork, eyes sharp with amusement. Marketing strategy and digital growth consulting, I said calmly, smiling over the dinner table. I run a boutique agency from home. Leonard let out a grunt. Must be nice not to have a boss breathing down your neck all day. I chuckled politely, even though I'd heard this same conversation, with different phrasings, a dozen times. Marshall shifted uncomfortably in his seat next to me but, as usual, said nothing. So, no real job then, Audrey muttered, just loud enough to sting. I'm Marissa, 39, divorced, mother of 2 boys, and the founder of a digital marketing consultancy that I started out of desperation and grew into a 7-figure business. But if you asked my ex-in-laws, they'd probably tell you I play on the computer all day. They never respected my work, never even tried to understand it. For them, unless you're leaving the house with a briefcase or working with your hands, you're probably just faking your way through life. Audrey worked as a nurse for over 30 years, and Leonard spent his career on the factory floor. I respected that deeply. I truly did, but they couldn't seem to extend the same courtesy to me. The dismissiveness started subtly when I first left my job after Jude, our youngest, was born. I had been a project manager for a mid-sized software company in Denver. After juggling 2 kids, a 2-hour round-trip commute, and mounting postpartum depression that no one really noticed, I left. I took a severance package and a huge leap of faith. I had no plan at first, just a laptop, a dusty marketing degree, and a fire in my gut. From that first moment, the comments started. Every visit from the in-laws became a small gauntlet. Still unemployed? Do you guys even have health insurance? What does she actually do, Marshall? Over time, those jabs went from frustrating to genuinely hurtful, because while they were scoffing, I was building. I was networking on LinkedIn, cold calling leads, learning SEO in between diaper changes. I built my client base from local boutique shops to a nationwide retail chain. I brought on contractors. I rented a space over our garage and turned it into my home office. But to Audrey and Leonard, I was still playing entrepreneur. The real kicker, Marshall never once stood up for me. He'd crack a small joke, change the subject, or excuse their behavior with a tired, "They just don't get it." And maybe they didn't. But after a while, it became clear he didn't either. The distance between us grew quietly, slowly. He'd get home from work and barely ask about my day. When I showed him our monthly revenue charts or let him peek at my newest pitch deck, his eyes would glaze over. He hated his job, but he also hated that I didn't hate mine. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten until I overheard a phone call between him and his mother late one night. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I heard him down the hall. "She thinks she's some CEO now or whatever," he said, in that mocking tone he used when he was being performatively humble. "Honestly, I don't even know how much she's making. She doesn't share that stuff anymore." That wasn't true. He just hadn't listened. The next morning, I pretended I hadn't heard it. I told myself it was stressful, that we were both tired, that he didn't mean it that way. But things didn't get better. He withdrew even further, started spending weekends working late, and began guarding his phone like it contained state secrets. We started arguing about everything. The kids' schedules, grocery bills, who was doing more around the house. It was always me. It had always been me. Then I found the texts. He was seeing someone from his office. Someone easier to talk to, someone who got him. Her name was Madeline, and from the context of their conversations, she was very interested in helping him relax after a long day. That was the last straw. I filed for divorce a week later. Marshall begged for mediation, not court. I agreed for the kids, but the respect was gone, and the love had died quietly sometime between his indifference and my exhaustion. Audrey and Leonard didn't take it well. They blamed me. Of course they did. "You changed once you started making money," Audrey snapped over the phone. "You emasculated him." I was stunned. She said it so plainly, as though my success was a weapon I had used against her son. Never mind that he had betrayed me. Never mind that he had opted out of our marriage long before I ever hired an assistant. They barely spoke to me for months after the divorce was finalized. which, honestly, was a relief. But fate has a sense of humor. Because right around that time, I received an email from the women in Tech Alliance. My company, now called Luminate Strategies, has been nominated for a national award. They were flying finalists to Seattle for a formal gala, and I'd been asked to be the keynote speaker. I froze reading the email. I made it. Not in a flash and glam kind of way, but in the kind of way that comes from building something with your bare hands while people laugh in your face. Still, I almost said no. Then I remembered all the years of snide remarks, the smirks, the dismissals, so instead of saying no, I called Audrey. Hey, I said. I'm going to Seattle for a business event around Thanksgiving. Want to come? She was confused. Leonard grunted in the background. What kind of event? A gala, I said, keeping it breezy. Formal, industry stuff. They agreed, mostly out of curiosity and possibly the assumption that I'd exaggerated everything. We flew out the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I booked us suites at the Grand Hyatt downtown. The boys stayed with Marshall that week. Audrey complained about the plain food. Leonard didn't understand why I wasn't wearing work clothes if it was a business trip. That night, I let them stew. On the night of the gala, I wore a navy pantsuit. Not flashy, just sharp. My assistant, a whip-smart woman named Asha, met us in the lobby. Audrey raised an eyebrow when Asha introduced herself. Your assistant? Chief of staff, I corrected gently. We walked into the ballroom together, round tables, name cards, a red carpet along one wall, soft jazz humming from a stage corner. Giant digital screens circled the room, displaying names of nominees. My name was everywhere. Audrey grew quiet. Leonard looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. They spelled your name wrong, he asked, almost hopeful. No, I said, that's me. Then the lights dimmed. The host began speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage your keynote speaker and this year's Top Entrepreneur Award winner, Marissa Callahan. I heard it. That stunned whisper from Audrey. Wait, she's the keynote speaker. I stepped onto the stage, heart pounding, not with nerves, but with satisfaction. Real, earned, gritty satisfaction. And I spoke. I talked about starting over, about being doubted, about building something real while the people around you joke that you're just playing house. I never named names, but I saw their faces change. They finally understood. When I left the stage, people stood and clapped. Not for me exactly, but for what I represented. And Audrey? She sat frozen in her seat, hands clasped in her lap. Leonard didn't say a word. I didn't need them to say anything. They had seen. On the ride back to the hotel, Audrey was uncharacteristically quiet. Leonard sat beside her in the back of the car, staring out the window like the city was brand new. I didn't press them. The silence was its own victory. Asha walked ahead of us once we reached the lobby, headed to her room with a quick good night. I could feel Audrey's eyes on me as I took out the room keycards from my purse. You knew, didn't you? She asked suddenly. Knew what? That you were getting that award, that you were going to speak. You brought us here on purpose. I looked at her. Yes, I said simply. Leonard exhaled hard through his nose. He was still processing, I think, or maybe stewing. He hadn't said a word since dinner. It wasn't about rubbing it in, I added, unlocking the door. It was about showing you what I've built, because for years I kept waiting for someone to see it. I kept waiting for you to ask. Audrey didn't reply, but she followed me into the suite and sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. She looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally worn in a way that surprised me. I just didn't understand what any of it meant, she said finally. Marketing, digital stuff, it all sounded like buzzwords. That's okay, I said. You didn't have to understand all of it. Just that it mattered to me. That was as close as she would come to an apology that night, but it was a crack. A first sign that maybe they were beginning to unlearn what they thought they knew about success, about work, about me. The next morning, we had breakfast at a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market. Audrey still wasn't her usual self, less judgmental, less sharp, but there was an awkward softness to her now, a kind of recalibration. Leonard didn't say much, but I caught him glancing at me a few times like I was someone he hadn't properly seen before. On the flight home, Audrey turned to me before we took off. Did your parents see you speak? I shook my head. They passed away before the business took off. She looked out the window. They'd be proud. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Back in Boulder, life resumed its usual rhythm. The boys came back from Marshall's. excited and sticky from too much screen time and junk food. I took a few days off to just be a mom again, school drop-offs, library trips, Lego building marathons. Marshall didn't ask about the trip. I'm not sure if he knew or if he was avoiding the subject. We were civil, but cool. The kind of chilly distance people keep when they've both said too much and not enough. But things had shifted. Slowly. Audrey started calling more often, asking about the kids, sure, but also about that client you mentioned, or what kind of projects you've got coming up. They weren't deep conversations, but she was listening in a way she never had before. One afternoon a few weeks later, she came over to drop off some baked goods. She had Jude on her lap, feeding him a slice of banana bread, when she turned to me and said, "What do you actually do for these companies? Like, walk me through it." I blinked. "Do you want the short version or the real one?" "Real one." So I told her. About brand audits, about data-driven content strategy, about funnel optimization and scaling social growth through paid campaigns. I kept it simple, but I didn't dumb it down. And she nodded, slowly, like each new term was a puzzle piece snapping into place. Leonard was a tougher nut to crack. He didn't ask questions. But when I showed up at the boys' school fundraiser with a company-sponsored booth and a banner that read, "Proudly sponsored by Luminate Strategies," he did a double take. "That's you?" he asked. "All me." He nodded once, just once. But it was something. The thing about validation is that by the time you finally get it, you don't need it anymore. Not really. But it's still a strange kind of peace, one that fills in old bruises you'd forgotten were still sore. One weekend, while the boys were with their dad, I took a solo trip to Estes Park. Just me, a weekend bag, and a reservation at a lodge with mountain views. I hiked. I journaled. I thought about how far I'd come and how no one, not even the people who claimed to know me best, had really seen the work behind the scenes. Success isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 small decisions made in silence. It's staying up after the kids are in bed to send one more proposal. It's crying quietly at your desk because a client backed out and you don't know how you'll make payroll next month. It's doing the thing even when the people around you treat it like a hobby. That's what they never saw. But now, maybe, they were beginning to. A few weeks later, Audrey surprised me again. She invited me to speak at her church's women's group, a small community circle for career and purpose. She said they'd had a woman last month who was a local real estate broker. "They'd love to hear your story," she said. "You know what it's like to build something." "Are you sure?" I asked. She looked me dead in the eye. "You changed my mind, Marissa, might change theirs too." I agreed. The day of the talk, I stood in front of 20 or so older women, all in cardigans and sensible shoes, some with notepads in their laps. I told them the real story, not the PR version, but the one with the hard parts intact. And they listened. Afterward, Audrey pulled me aside. "You know," she said slowly, "for years I thought you were pretending. Like playing house, but with emails and laptops. I didn't know women like you existed." I smiled. "What kind of woman is that?" She looked down, then back at me. "One who doesn't need approval to know she's doing the right thing." It wasn't an apology, but it was something even rarer, respect. Not everyone claps when you win. Not everyone cheers when you succeed. But sometimes, just sometimes, you can bring them with you into the room, into the truth, and let them witness it. And when they do, they never see you the same way again. The church event was a quiet turning point. Not the dramatic kind that screams for attention, but a slow, grounding shift. After my talk, several women came up to me to ask about starting businesses of their own. Some wanted help getting their small Etsy shops off the ground. Others just wanted to know if it was too late to try something new at 58, or 63, or 70. I told them the truth. It's only too late if you're waiting for someone else to give you permission. Audrey hovered nearby during most of the Q&A, listening. She didn't interrupt, didn't undermine me, didn't crack a single joke. That, in itself, was monumental. It was the first time I ever felt like we were on the same side of something. Leonard didn't come to the event, but when I saw him the following week at a school play, he gave me a tight nod, almost imperceptible. Then, halfway through the performance, he leaned over to me and said, "So, your company. You got employees now?" I nodded. 7 full-time, 3 part-time. We just hired a creative director last month." He didn't say anything else, just turned back to the stage. But I noticed the way he sat a little straighter after that. Even Marshall seemed to notice the shift. At a handoff one Friday afternoon, he lingered a little longer than usual in the driveway. "So, I heard about that keynote thing," he said. "Audrey keeps bringing it up." "She's proud," I said. I didn't bother sugarcoating it. He kicked at the gravel near his tires. "Didn't think she had it in her," I shrugged. "People change when they're forced to face the truth." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I guess I should have believed in it more." I looked at him then, not with resentment but with clarity. I didn't need belief, I needed support. He looked away. "Yeah." That was the last real conversation we ever had beyond co-parenting logistics, and honestly, it was enough. Life kept moving, the business grew. We launched a new analytics platform, got featured in Inc. magazine, and opened a second office in Austin. I started mentoring young female founders, something I never imagined I'd do. And every time I took the stage at a panel or workshop, I thought about all the times people had smirked when I said I worked from home. But the real full-circle moment came a year later. The same women in Tech Alliance that had hosted the gala reached out again. This time, not just to speak, but to chair the awards committee. It felt surreal, sitting on the other side of the table, helping select the next round of honorees. Reading stories of women who bootstrapped businesses between shifts, raised capital while raising toddlers, and turned pain into power. Every application felt like a kindred spirit. At the annual gala, I delivered a short welcome speech and introduced the new keynote speaker. I stayed at the table with Audrey and Leonard, who had flown out with me this time by invitation. Audrey wore a beaded jacket she'd borrowed from her friend, and Leonard wore a tie, which he kept tugging at like it was trying to strangle him. When the host came over to our table to thank me for my work, Audrey smiled and said, "We're so proud of her." She meant it. I could see it. And that's when it hit me, this was revenge, not the flashy Instagram kind, not the gloating or look what you missed out on revenge. This was quieter, softer, and yet far more satisfying. Because the people who doubted me the most, they now bragged about me to their friends. Audrey sent me articles about women in business. Leonard recommended me to a neighbor whose daughter was starting a bakery. Even Marshall, on more than one occasion, admitted he never expected me to go this far. "You always had it in you," he told me once. "I just didn't know how to handle it." That's the thing about small minds. They shrink from big dreams. And now, I don't shrink anymore. The final thread in this whole tapestry of poetic justice came on a random Tuesday morning. I got an email from my old boss in Denver. The one I used to work under back when I was just a cog in a project management machine. He was laid off during a restructuring and had launched a freelance consulting business. He asked if I'd be open to a quick call for advice or maybe some subcontracting work. I smiled. He used to roll his eyes at those marketers during team meetings. Now he was asking me for guidance. I helped him, of course, because that's who I am. But deep down, I savored the symmetry. What I learned through all of this is that revenge doesn't need to be angry. It doesn't need to be cruel. Sometimes, the best revenge is building a life so full, so rich, and so unshakably your own that even the doubters can't help but admire it. They say success is the best revenge. But I think respect, earned respect, is the real prize.